Hello and welcome to Paranormal Chronicles. I'm your host, Joe Miranda. Today's episode is The Apology. Before I start, I just want to make it very clear that I'm a flawed man and I'm a sinner. I believe in God. I do believe that Jesus Christ is my Savior, and I renounce Satan. However, I will not underestimate Satan's abilities to blind minds, eyes, ears, and hearts here on this earth. Five 2021, kind of right in the middle of the whole COVID thing. In the early AM, I was starting to drift off to sleep, but I know I wasn't asleep. And this entity, I saw this entity hovering in front of me, and it really shocked me because, as I said, I know I wasn't asleep. I know I wasn't dreaming. And this entity was like almost staring through me. And I remember how intense it was. And it appeared to be pretty distressed and somewhat agitated or even aggravated. It, like I said, it almost stared right through me, and then it said, "Tell them I'm sorry for the things I said and did." And again, it hovered there for a few more moments, and I noticed that it was wearing it was a, wearing either a blue suit or a blue outfit. And I thought at the time, well, that's kind of interesting because my dad was buried in a blue suit, and I'm not sure if it was a blue shirt. It may have been a lighter blue shirt, but I I saw though that this entity appeared to be larger and taller than my father in perspective. Don't ask me how I knew, but I just it and I didn't recognize the face. Uh, but putting that aside, as I stated, it hovered few more seconds after it made the statement, to tell them I'm sorry for the things I said and did, and then it was gone. But I'll never forget how intense its eyes were. I mean, like I said, it was looked like it felt like it was staring right through me. And so, um, I put it in my journal because that's kind of the instructions. Just document it, and eventually all the dots will connect. So I'm going to fast forward to the 3rd of July of 2021. I was talking to my brother, and he was talking about my father's pickup. Now, my father passed in 2009, and he had a 1960 Ford F100. And I thought that was kind of odd that he was talking about the pickup truck because I said to him, well, I thought my sister Christine and her husband Dave had purchased it from the state when we were taking care of the estate. And my brother said, uh, you know, Dave isn't going to have anything to do with that truck. He passed away. And I said, well, I hadn't heard that. Um, Now that's not surprising due to the fact that I hadn't spoken to Dave in years. Uh, Actually, it had been 20 years because um, David had some some struggles with alcohol and substance abuse, and when my mother was on her deathbed at the University of Maryland, David got off the wagon and I don't know exactly what his intoxication level was or what he was intoxicated on, but he basically thrashed my mom and dad's house. And, dealing with mom passing and everything else, we had to deal with that too because he did a good number on the inside of the house. He never apologized for it. Uh, didn't really seem remorseful about it, from what I could understand from my father, who found him in the house passed out after the event. But I never spoke to him again. Uh, Forgave him in my heart, but never forgot it. So that was in April of 2000. So we're talking over 21 years later. So with that said, I, I was shocked that he had passed. Obviously I had no contact with him and nobody reached out to me when he passed away. But, you know, I took the news, and then after I got off the phone with my brother, I looked up his obituary, and I found out that he had passed away on the 14th of May, 2021, which was when I had that entity come to me, it was 12, 14 hours later. And the interesting thing about that is that in the picture for Dave's obituary, he was wearing a light blue shirt, the same color as what I saw the entity was outfitted in. In fact, looking then at the picture, again, I hadn't seen Dave in 20 years, but there was the resemblance. There was definitely resemblance to the entity that I saw. And, you know, it shocked me. But again, it didn't. So I was kind of, I was put in a position where I had to set aside my personal feelings and do what I thought was the right thing. And I made it a point to reach out to um, my sister, and I shared that with her. Also made it a point to share it with my sister in law, my other brother's wife. She was the cousin. They were related. Their mothers, they were twins. Dave's mother and my sister in law's mother were sisters, and they were twin sisters. Another interesting um, tidbit to this. I found out the 3rd of July. Then I attended a 4th of July event, and I spent the night at my friend Kelly's house. And I had made some baked beans to take over to the event. And when I came home on the morning of the 5th, the timer, the kitchen timer was going off. I mean, just blaring away. And that was strange enough. I mean, I had turned that timer off when I was making the baked beans that I took over the uh, 2 days before that. The other oddity was when I went into my home office slash music room, it smelled of drywall and spackling. No, I worked in the construction trade years ago, know that smell very well. The amazing thing about it is Dave worked in construction. He was a handyman. He did a lot of construction, did a lot of drywall. And when I walked into that office slash music room, couldn't have mistaken it. It smelled just like somebody had redone a room in somebody's house, you know, drywall, paint, that whole new construction smell of things. And I shared that with my brother's wife, Dave's cousin, and that blew her away. So it's no small feat that when entities want to reach out to us, they're going to. We just have to hear it. We have to be still and quiet and be in a place where we can accept it once we do hear it. Now, like I said, and it wasn't a hard fight. I mean, it was the right thing to do to uh, tell my sister, and I told her to share it with Dave's son, and same with my sister-in-law. Got to do the right thing. You got to separate your personal feelings if you're going to do God's will. And I'm sure that was a test for me as well to see how I would respond to that. And I just knew that I had to do the right thing and tell them. Another um, another interesting side note to this is I spoke to my sister-in-law yesterday. I wanted to prepare before I did this episode, make sure I had my facts straight, and because I don't want to misrepresent things. So I reached out to her, and from what I could gather from my younger brother, is that David passed at home, that he was at a facility and he came home and he passed away. Now, in speaking with my sister in law yesterday, she shared with me that either the day that David had passed or the day before David had passed, he was calling everyone he knew because he wanted to get out of this facility and go home. And my sister in law was fearful that he may have been extremely upset and distraught, uh, because he was calling everybody, and everybody's response, they weren't responding back to him because they wanted him to stay in the facility because he was sick. And from what everybody was telling her afterwards, with I believe the voice messages he was leaving, he was extremely agitated and distressed, like the entity that presented itself to me on the 15th of May, 2021. I didn't find that out until yesterday, and she had never shared it with me. And of course, I couldn't possibly know that. It's pretty amazing. Now, that was the same demeanor as that entity. And the other interesting thing is that when I made the entry into my journal, I documented that the watchers were very specific about how I put that entry in the journal. It took me almost an hour to enter it. I was going back and forth, and I could sense when the entry was right with the details. And I mean, it was only a 5 or 6 sentence entry into my journal, but it took almost an hour because the wording had to be just right, and I obviously the details had to be just right because you know over 5 years later, I'm talking about this on the podcast. If I hadn't known about the demeanor of the entity, that could have got lost um, in in the memory of what happened that night. Um, so just finding out what David's demeanor was shortly before he passed and comparing that to the entity, it's pretty shocking. Now, um, one thing that I want to stress here is obviously the reason for this podcast is to help educate and inform people what my experiences have been. Now, with that said, I probably made this comment in the past. God does not disclose anything he doesn't want the world to know. And this is my thought and the reason for this podcast, and especially from what I found out yesterday, because I was prepared to do the podcast beforehand, but I just kept getting this impression that I needed to speak with my sister-in-law before I did this podcast. There was something missing, and obviously that missing something was what she told me about David's demeanor before he passed away, and how that connects to the entity that I saw on the 15th of May 2021. So I believe, and I'll share this if there's anybody out there in the listening audience or the podcast audience that comes across an entity and they can sense it and feel it. And I have felt and sensed joy, angst, anger, distress, anxiety. I have sensed those things with entities. And I think that was also affirmation for me that if I'm picking up on it at that moment, then that's what the entity is going through. And I believe for some entities it may take them some time to pass over to the other side, or they're unsure. That's my experience. So with that said, if anybody in the audience comes across an entity that's trying to communicate them and they can sense, especially things like angst, anxiety, anger, confusion, try to comfort them. Even if you don't know who that entity is, you can still comfort it because there's some people that have a gift that they can pick up on these things. And you can comfort them. You can give them reassurance. Always tell them to go to the light, be judged before God. Remind them that God loves them. God is a forgiving God. He's a benevolent God. And I think if we start to do that on a large scale, that's going to be a great help. It's going to change the vibration of the universe here in this realm, which it has to. Another thing that I found very interesting before I did this podcast, I've been contemplating doing this specific entry, is that within the past week, I had come in contact with two people that were talking to me about entities. And each time it had to do with entities coming to people that weren't sure, or I shouldn't say they weren't sure. They were sure that they weren't dreaming when they saw the entity. And they were very specific to say they weren't sleeping the same way that I had put it in my journal. So, a lot of times we get that affirmation we're looking for. So sometimes you just have to accept that affirmation for what it is. And, you know, one more interesting thing is that the previous podcast was about atonement. And I'll be honest with everyone, I don't have a specific episode or journal entry sequence. I knew that I had to do the atonement episode, but had no clue that I would be doing this episode, the apology. I had no idea. But the apology falls right on the heels of the atonement episode, where an entity was wanting to make it very clear that they were remorseful for the things they said and did while they were here.